For this tape, we're going to investigate the life and the thoughts of probably the most influential philosopher in all of history. Now, Socrates was a big name, and we'll look at other big names. But I think it was Alfred North Whitehead who said that the entirety of the history of philosophy is simply a footnote to Plato. Plato is a giant among giants. Not so much because what he said is any more or less true than anyone else. In fact, he had some really kind of out there kind of ideas, as we'll see. But the main reason why Plato was such a giant among giants in philosophy is that he was the first, at least the first that we know of, who brought together a complete systematized sort of collection of ideas that sought to integrate all the entirety of human experience and knowledge under one sort of umbrella, interpretive umbrella. And so he was really the first one in history that we see doing that. Now, there will be others who come after him, and those who come after him usually have to either agree with him and then maybe expound or add to his theories, or they disagree with him, and some in a very sharp way. But nonetheless, even those great ones who are found disagreeing with him, such as his very own student Aristotle, we'll see him next. But even people like Aristotle have to deal with what Plato originally laid down. And so much of the history of philosophy really is a response to some of the things that Plato introduced. Now, much of Plato is not new. We've seen in the pre-Socratics, for example, rationalists. Plato is going to have a rationalist perspective or approach to his theory. However, it's going to vary a little bit. So anyhow, Plato, in the body of work that survives from Plato, it runs the gamut from metaphysics to epistemology to ethics and beyond, even in various, touching upon every aspect there. So we're going to look at some of what he thought. Of course, again, like as with any of these lectures, much more could be said about Plato. We're going to hit some highlights, but I do encourage you to go ahead and read the text because you'll go a little bit more in depth there. So anyway, Plato was a student of Socrates. He was one of Socrates' fans who followed him around, one of his disciples or his students who followed Socrates around. The difference between Socrates and Plato, however, is that Plato eventually wrote down the things that he thought. He wrote them down and made records of them in this sort of thing, whereas Socrates never really left anything, at least none that we have surviving, any manuscripts for later generations. So anyhow, but he's a student of Socrates, very much an advocate for Socrates. He believes in what Socrates represents. He seeks to carry on Socrates' traditions. And he's, one would think, especially since the way that he writes of him, that probably Plato was very fond of Socrates, maybe even looked up to him as a beloved mentor. In fact, after Socrates is put to death, Plato ends up sort of leaving the country and traveling abroad, finding other schools of philosophy to encounter. We have a good reason to believe that he might have come into contact, for example, with the Pythagoreans. And so anyway, Plato was kind of a traveled philosopher as well. Well, anyway, he makes his way back to Athens, and he starts up a school of his own. You see, Plato was from an aristocratic family. He was apparently well-to-do and had means in order to support himself and carry on his ventures. This is probably why much of his manuscripts survive. Probably he was able to accumulate to himself a library, or at least a study, to where he could write these things down, and as he would teach them, have them recorded for posterity. Now, Plato returns to Athens after traveling abroad, and he starts a school. The school is known as the Academy, which basically is the word that we use for schools today, academies, but it's known as the Academy. People come there to study. There is a large following, probably that included a lot of the followers of Socrates, but certainly even the next generation of philosophy students join in and study at the Academy. Those are just a few things about Plato and a history of him. Not a whole lot other than that is known about him. His name, by the way, means broad. And there's also much evidence to show that Plato might have been a wrestler, kind of a big guy. So if you can think of a philosopher who's also into MMA, that sort of thing, that's who Plato was. He was kind of a big guy, and yet very well thought out and employed his reason and so forth. Anyhow, so let's talk a little bit about some of the things that Plato taught. Now, to understand Plato, and we'll start with his metaphysic, his understanding of the world, ultimate reality, and existence. Plato believed that the world actually, that all of reality is formed, or all of reality basically exists in two worlds. So if you think Plato, think two worlds. There's what Francis Schaeffer, a philosopher of the 20th century, calls the upper story and then the lower story. And for Plato believed in the world, the material world, and that's the world that we live in, the world that we experience. That you and I live in these material bodies, we interact with matter all day long in the material world. And that would have been the lower story. That's the world of experience, the world of senses, or sensory perception and that kind of thing. But in addition to the world of matter, or the material world, there is also what Plato would refer to as the world of the forms. The world of the forms. Now, when we first bring this up, a lot of times people have in mind, when the term world of the forms is used, people have in mind that we're talking about an extraterrestrial planet of some kind. And in addition to Earth, there's another world out there, or a planet out there, that Plato refers to as the world of the forms. But that's not at all what he's talking about. The world of the forms, he does believe exists, but it's not an extraterrestrial world. The forms are conceptual. They are ideas. It's not. They have no material existence. They are non-material. And so the world of the forms necessarily transcends the material world. You might do well to look through the PowerPoint presentation that I've attached in this module, so that you can see sort of a graphic that I've composed to see maybe exactly what it is that I'm talking about. But imagine the world of the forms, and then there's the world of matter. Now, the two interact in such a way that the world of the forms, or ideas, gives meaning to the world of matter. And so it's kind of like this. The world, if I have a chair that's sitting in front of me, and let's say that the chair is made out of wood, it's made out of wood and steel and vinyl on it. Okay, well, what is it about that chair, the shape of the chair? Is it the shape of the chair? What is it about that chair that allows me to recognize it as a chair? Because chairs come in all sizes and shapes. And ultimately, as it relates to matter, that chair can be described in reference to the component materials that it's made of. What makes that hunk of metal and wood and vinyl, excuse me, what makes that a chair, and another hunk of wood, metal, and vinyl a couch, for example? Well, the meaning of the thing, according to Plato, is not inherent in the object, the material object. The meaning of the thing is inherent in the idea that we put behind it. We look at that object, that collection of matter, and we call it a chair. We could as easily call it, by another word, but we call it a chair, and that chair has meaning. And the meaning of that chair is wrapped up not in the hunk of matter itself. It is wrapped up, the meaning is wrapped up in our mind. It's wrapped up in the idea of chair. And so therefore we can look at many different sizes and shapes of chairs, and whether they're made of plastic or whether they're made of metal, whether they're made of wood or whether they're carved out of granite, whatever. We can look at chairs no matter the shape, the size, the material composition, and we can understand, because of the idea that we have in our mind, there is meaning given to that material object, and the meaning of chair is imbued to it from our minds. Now, the world of the forms consists of ideas, whereas the world of matter consists of matter, basically matter. The world of the forms gives meaning, whereas the world of matter, is the material world, in and of itself is meaningless. There's no inherent meaning to things on the earth. They only receive meaning when they reflect one of the forms. The world of the forms are eternal. They don't change. They've existed from eternity past, and will exist continually, unchanging and unchanged into the future. Whereas the world of matter is temporal. Things change here all the time. Not only do people age, and therefore they go through development and change, but matter itself is always changing, kind of like Heraclitus talked about. You see, Plato is trying to integrate the various philosophies that have come before him. Whereas Heraclitus says everything changes, Parmenides says nothing changes. Plato says, I see that you both have some really good points here. How can we integrate all of this understanding into one? And that's what he's trying to do. And so the world of the forms, that is objective. It exists outside of this material world. The world of the matter, the material world, is subjective. It takes on meaning as each one of us views certain parts of it, and we give meaning to it. The world of the forms has meaning, and the meaning that is inherent to the world of the forms, we can't change that. It exists as it is. We access the world of the forms through reason, so there's the rationalist sort of coming out, and we access the world of matter, or the material world, through our physical senses, and there's the empiricist coming out. So Plato is trying to combine all of these various philosophies that have come before and say, yes, there's merit to each one of them in certain ways. We need to integrate them so that we can make sense of the whole of existence. For example, can we reason and come to knowledge? Well, certainly we can. So Plato believes that the world of the forms is necessary in order for us to be able to know anything through reason. But can we also come to knowledge through examining things with our physical, empirical senses? Well, certainly we can. Plato understands that as well, and so he wants to have a facet or a place rather for being able to arrive at knowledge through physical senses, and that is the material world. We interact with the material world on the basis of physical senses. So what Plato is trying to do is just to integrate the whole of our experience and come up with a philosophy that explains it or interprets it well for us. So there's the world of the forms, and then there's the world of matter, or the material world. Now, we live at the same time in both realms. And Plato believes that we understand, or we know things about the material world because the objective world of the forms gives us that knowledge. That's his understanding there. Now, he gives an allegory of this to maybe illustrate the point. And this particular allegory is very famous. Anybody who teaches on Plato will include this allegory in their teaching. However, it's often misunderstood. The allegory is not about some sort of religious experience. The allegory is not about, it's not about sort of a eureka, I have found it moment. The allegory is a metaphysical statement that Plato is making. And what he is essentially saying is that if we dwell in the world of matter, in the material world only, and if we concern ourselves only in the concepts of the material world, then we haven't really fully embraced the entirety of what life is about. And we will not reach true wisdom. And we will live in a world that is a world of shadows. More on that in just a minute. What we need to do is to escape the idea that we can only come to knowledge through examining the material world. We need to use reason to access the world of the forms, and then interpret all things in light of the forms that are out there. That then and only then can we really truly arrive at wisdom and knowledge and developing our souls and becoming virtuous people. So here's the analogy of the cave. Plato says, imagine this. Imagine this is basically how the world works. Imagine, if you will, a cave in which there are prisoners chained to the wall. And these prisoners are locked into their prison in such a way that they cannot move their arms or their feet. Their arms and feet are chained. And there is a chain or a lock that is keeping their head in one place so they can only see what's directly in front of them. They cannot turn their head either way, one way or the other, to see what's beside them or around them. All that they can see is what is directly in front of them. And so that's the entirety. They've been that way since birth. That's the entirety of their existence, and that's all that they know. And let's say there are 5 or 6 of them chained up there. Now, behind the prisoners, a little bit above and behind them, there is a raised wall where people and objects sort of are paraded across this raised wall, a path behind them. And behind them, there's a fire that's been emblazoned. And that fire is casting a shadow of the people and objects that are being paraded across this walkway behind them, such that all that they see are the shadows on the wall. And so a camel, for example, will go and walk behind them, and they will smell the camel, they will hear the camel, but they'll see the shadow of a camel on the wall. And they'll come up with a word for the camel, the shadow that they see. And so they call it a camel. And they believe, because their experience testifies to them, that shadow is actually the camel. Well, somebody will parade a musical instrument, and they're playing the musical instrument as it's being paraded. And the people who are chained, the prisoners who are chained, are looking on the wall behind them, or in front of them rather, and they see the shadow of this person playing a musical instrument as he's playing it, and they come up with a name for that musician. And so they believe that the shadow is the substance and the total of that musician. And so on and so on and so on. With everything that's paraded behind them, they begin to think that thing, whatever that thing is the actual thing in and of itself. And so the prisoners live their life in this cave in such a way that all that they ever know and all that they ever experience are the shadows. That is until one day, one of the prisoners is set free. And that prisoner is taken up into the outside world. And at first, that prisoner is startled because of the sunlight. And they've grown up, and they've seen nothing since they were a child. They've seen nothing but the darkness of the cave. And his eyes are acclimated to the darkness of the cave. And now that he's outside, the sunlight hurts his eyes. And it takes quite a while for him to get used to that. And he get used to the sunlight that just burns him. But as soon as he does, he begins to look around in the world around him, and he sees things for what they really are. And he sees the camels that go by, and he realizes, wait a minute, this kind of looks like the shadow that I saw, the shadow on the wall. But the shadow on the wall isn't actually the camel. The camel is actually the camel. This beast, this three-dimensional thing that I can touch and I can feel. It has more body to it. It has more substance to it, and so on. And he goes along, and he hears a person playing music, and he looks over there and he sees the person playing music, and all of a sudden he says, well, that's the musician that I saw the shadow on the wall, and it was nothing more than a shadow, but this is the reality that is behind that shadow, this musician. And he begins to realize that all the shadows that he had seen paraded in front of him while he was growing up in this world of shadows, in this world in the cave, all of these things were nothing more than just a reflection or a shadow from the real thing which casts the shadow. In fact, as he begins to look around, he realizes that his body even casts a shadow, and he sees what his shadow looks like. But he realizes the nature of the connection between the real thing and the shadow, and he is overjoyed. He's overjoyed with his newfound description, and then he goes back. He goes back to his friends who he grew up with in the cave, the prisoners that are still there and still locked up. Now imagine if he went back to them and he tried to explain to them, what you see in front of you is not real. What you see in front of you is simply a shadow. And how would he even explain to them what a shadow was? How would he even explain to them that the shadow is cast by the body of a real thing? That the camel is not the shadow on the back of the wall. The camel is actually a beast, a camel in and of itself. It has a body. It's more than this flickering light. You know what? One of the funny things about it, or the ironic things about it, would be this. Once he went back in there and he began to discuss with the people who were still in prison there about what a shadow was, he wouldn't be able to see the shadows as well as they could, because his eyes would be acclimated to the light. He wouldn't be settled to be content with explaining terms and simply in relationship to the flickering of light and the shadows. He would at all times trying to convince his friends that, look, this is not the real world. This is not the way it is. You need to come with me and get out of this place. And you need to go to the world. It'll hurt at first, but your eyes will hurt at first. But as soon as your eyes adjust to it, you'll be able to see perfectly fine what the real world is like, and so on and so on. Plato talks about this. And he says, what would those prisoners do if they could to that person? Surely they would think that he was crazy. They would think that he was raving mad, because the world, as far as they knew it, was simply defined by the shadows. They would take him, and if they could, they would get their hands on him, they would kill him. And of course, that's a reference to Socrates, because Plato believes that Socrates, through the use of reason, had gone to the outer world, had understood the true nature of reality, had brought it back for people to understand and to see. And because they did not want to go into the light, because they did not believe him, they killed him. But this is a metaphysical statement that Plato is making. He's saying, look, outside of this material world that we live in, there is a world of the forms. And the world of the forms is a world that is perfect. It is permanent. It has meaning. It's the world of ideas. And it's from this world of ideas that we sort of mold this material world into the shape that we want it to be like. And we give meaning to this material world. Other than that, this world would have no meaning whatsoever. It would be too chaotic. So that's Plato's understanding of the world of the forms in the world of the material world. He relates it as related through his allegory of the cave. Now, just to maybe kind of get a little bit at this idea of the forms and the material world. If you think about yourself, think if you had been stranded on a desert island, or not a desert island, but a tropical island. You're in the middle of the tropics. You're alone on this island. The island seems to be big enough to survive on until somebody can come rescue you. Well, what do you have there to work with? Well, you really don't have a whole lot of anything. I mean, there are trees, there are vines, there are rocks, but not a lot there to survive with. So what do? Well, you begin to fashion, take what's on hand. Maybe you break down some trees and you form up a shelter, and you create this shelter in order to have a place to live and be protected by from the elements. And so you take that matter, which really has no meaning in and of itself, and you use the idea in your mind on how to construct a shelter. You build the shelter so that you can live. And what did you do in order to give meaning to the matter that you found in the world around you? Well, you used ideas. and ideas come from your mind. And that's what Plato's talking about here. We shape this world according to our ideas. This world is meaningless other than that. But we take from this world and we shape it in such a way because of our ideas that we have. Maybe you're stranded on this island and you want to take and write something on the ground, so if any planes are going overhead, they see a message. And so you cut down a bunch of trees, or you just get a bunch of logs and you arrange them in the form of the word help, and you put it out on the beach so that any planes flying overhead will see the word help spelled out. Well, does the log have the meaning of the word help? No. Does the sand? No. But using the idea that you have in your mind, using the idea, you take and you shape and you form the world in which you live in order for it to suit your needs. Things in the world have no meaning in themselves. They only have meaning as we use ideas to give meaning to them. So that's really what Plato is getting at. Now, this world of ideas, this world of forms, if you will, and that's really what the forms are. They're concepts, they're ideas. This world of the forms is a world that Plato believes is eternal, it's unchanging. And so for every chair that we see here, there is a perfect chair form in the world of the forms. And the world of the forms is you might think of it maybe as an extra dimensional world. It's the world that gives meaning to us. Now, how then do we access the world of the forms? How do we know that? Well, Plato believes, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, he believes that all knowledge is remembering. And what that means is Plato believes that you and I, before we came into this world and were born into this world in our bodies, you and I pre-existed this world, and we were in the world of the forms. Our soul was in the world of the forms, and it knew all things. It was familiar with all the forms. It knew all about them. However, when we came to this world, our soul was encased in matter. That's our body, right? Our soul was encased in matter, and in the process of this imprisonment of our soul in the matter of our bodies, our soul was sort of cut off from the world of the forms. It forgot. It's kind of like an amnesia, if you will. And so here we are. We are a material body, which is a soul that is imprisoned in this body of matter, and in order to arrive at knowledge, what we need to do is we need to use reason and contemplation in order to get back to and remember what we already knew from the time that our soul was in the world of the forms. And so all knowledge is remembering, Plato believes, and he sets out to try to prove this by taking, he goes up to a slave who was a young man. And the slave was a sort of worked in, he carried stuff or whatever. He was a physical laborer, manual labor. And he was uneducated, unlearned. And he was talking to this slave. And before long, just by asking a few leading questions, he demonstrates that this slave knows in his day what amounts to advanced geometry. What he did basically was he got him to articulate the Pythagorean theorem. And the person with whom Plato is speaking, or in the dialogue, it's actually Socrates that's speaking. The person with whom he's speaking is like, wow, even this unlearned slave, is able to do advanced geometry. He knows it already. Therefore, yes, all knowledge must be remembering. By the way, for the rationalists, the school of rationalism, this is one thing that we see arising all the time, and depending on who it is. I mean, Plato, we see that. Descartes talks about it, and so forth. Leibniz. They talk about this idea of innate ideas that we are somehow born with. This knowledge, this body of knowledge, it's different than instincts, right? Instincts are just sort of things that enable us for animal survival. But Plato takes it a step further, and he believes that we actually know things, and there's a content to our knowledge even before we're born. These innate ideas, this familiarity with the world of the forms, allows us to access and remember those things, and then to utilize them in the world around us. So Plato believes that we need to access the world of the forms by using philosophy, by using reason. That's how we get to these true concepts and these true ideas that give meaning to the world around us. And so that's one of his major points there. Plato believes that people, and this is implied in what we talked about just a moment ago, people exist in kind of a dualistic nature. Metaphysically, people exist in a dualistic nature, meaning that we have body and we have soul, or the immaterial part of ourselves. And the soul, again, is the good part. The body is bad. And we reason our ways to the world of ideas by using our soul, using that non-material part of our body. Now, speaking of the soul, Plato has a theory on that as well. He believes that the human soul is composed of three parts. This is found in Plato's Republic, and he discusses what it means to have a threefold division in the human soul. The first part of the human soul is that, or one of the parts, is that of appetite. He believes this is one component to the soul, appetite. This is basically desire or needs of the flesh, if you will, this sort of thing. This is the animal drives within us. Things like hunger, things like the drive for sex, the drive for sleep. And Plato compares this, and in another analogy that he makes, compares this particular aspect of our soul to a black horse that is wild and wily, right? And so there's this part of our soul over here, the appetite. Now, also, he says, we also have another part of our soul that he refers to as our spirit. And the spirit is the part of our soul that is ambitious, the part of our soul that is adventurous, tries to seek for glory, tries to drive for survival. It's not meeting a physical appetite. It's more that part of us that drives us to seek adventure and things like that. That's our spirit. And so there's the appetite, and then there's the spirit. And he compares the spirit to a white horse that is sort of a noble steed. And that's the analogy that he makes there. So you've got the black horse of appetite, the white horse of spirit. And then he talks about a third part of the soul, and that is reason. Now, the part of our soul that allows us to reason, that is the thinking part of our soul. That's wisdom, volition, and that kind of thing. And so that's the third part of the soul. And he makes the analogy of this third part of our soul to that of a charioteer, or a person who drives a chariot. And when he talks about how to have a well-ordered soul, Plato uses this analogy. He says that appetite, that is the desire for physical indulgence, in spirit, the drive for adventure, the drive for glory, those are the two of the primary motivating factors in our lives, and that's part of our soul. Those are like horses that are reined together on a chariot. And reason is the one who must keep both appetite and spirit together, reined in together, so that neither of them get out of control. Because if we don't allow reason to guide both our spirit and our appetite, bad things happen, right? Because if our appetite is not reined in by reason, then we might go throughout life seeking to indulge every pleasure that we can, and in doing so, do much damage to ourselves and become very unbalanced. Likewise, if we let spirit lead the way, we might have some fun. We might do some crazy things. We might get glory and all of that. But at the end of the day, if we allow spirit to drive us, then we're also going to become unbalanced. And if we allow spirit to drive reason. Reason is the one, this thinking, the wisdom, the intellectual aspect of ourselves. That's the part of ourselves that needs to be the one who is in charge, reining these other two aspects of our soul in, so that we can get to where we need to go and we can adequately, function. So that's his understanding of the soul, and that's important. It's important to understand what he believes about the soul. Because then what Plato is going to do is he's going to take that from there, and he is going to develop a political philosophy. And this is one of Plato's most I guess, contentious or controversial aspects. Plato believes that first of all, he lives in a democracy, right? But he doesn't believe that's the ideal. He doesn't believe that is the ideal political setup. He believes democracy is fraught with problems. One of the major problems that he sees in democracy is that it allows people to develop sort of a mob mentality, and the mob is swayed by passions. You can be swayed. The mob can be convinced to govern by spirit or to govern by appetite and allow those things to take over. So he believes that the democracy is very prone to that, and it's a terrible system of governance. So he proposes, and this is in Republic, his book Republic. He proposes a different kind of political setup, one that people after him have referred to as a meritocracy. A meritocracy. Now, what is a meritocracy? A meritocracy basically is the idea that people fulfill certain roles in society based on their achievements or based on what they're most suited for, most fitted for. For example, we talked earlier about the three-part division of the human soul. So there are some people, Plato reasons, that are more given to being affected by the spirit, and so they go after glory, they go after adventure. That's the sort of thing that drives them. We might call them adrenaline junkies today. He believes there are also other people who are more affected by the appetite. They are driven by they're driven by a pursuit of trying to gather to themselves the comforts of this life or the comforts of this world. And so the people that are driven by the Spirit, those people tend to go for jobs that are like first responder jobs. These are people who are pilots or are policemen or firefighters, people who are in the military, this kind of thing. Those people are the people who are driven by Spirit. They don't mind a little bit of stress on the job like that. People who are driven by the Spirit are usually, that's almost everybody else in society. People who go to their job, they work their job, they do a good job. Maybe these people are, they're plumbers, they're builders, they're doctors, they're these kinds of jobs that involve more along the lines of something that's not quite so exciting and adventurous, but they do perform a significant task in society. Maybe they're builders, they're farmers. These are the people who are the backbone of a civilization. But they're the producers, if you will, in society. And Plato will refer to them as producers. The first groups, those who are first responders and military, he refers to those people as the auxiliaries. So the auxiliaries are those who are motivated by spirit. The producers are those who are motivated by appetite. And between the two of them, they form the bulk, the vast majority of the people who are in society. The third group, and this corresponds to the third aspect of the soul, are those who are motivated by wisdom. These are people who love to learn and love to teach. These are research scientists. These are teachers. These are people who just are into discovering the secrets of the universe. They don't necessarily care to do it for money. It's just a pursuit of them. They're wise, and they are driven by a need and a desire to learn. And he refers to them as philosophers. Of course, that's a broad term in his day. But people who love wisdom. So there are the producers, the auxiliaries, and the third group who are philosophers, who are motivated by wisdom. Plato calls the guardians. So they're the guardians. And Plato believes in his meritocracy that if you have each one of these groups of people functioning in their proper role of society, then the society or the state will operate like one big soul in one big body. So, for example, the producers should be producing. The auxiliaries should be guarding or saving or exploring, this kind of thing. And the guardians should be the ones who are ruling in society. And this is where he comes up with his his famous term, the rule or the governance of the philosopher kings. He believes that societies and states and civilizations should be led by those who are most equipped to do so, and those would be the philosophers. Those would be the people who love wisdom. And if a society is formulated in such a way, whereas the producers and the auxiliaries are being governed justly by the guardians, then that's going to be the perfectly just society. That's part of his conclusion in his Plato's Republic, where he addresses the issue of justice. So that's Plato's meritocracy. Now that's controversial, isn't it? Because he believes that some people are just, either too apathetic or too dumb to be involved in governance. That certainly is a departure from what we in the United States hold as necessarily true. We will allow pretty much anybody to serve in public office so long as they meet a certain set of minimum criteria. And so that has been very controversial throughout the ages. People say that it supports tyranny of some kind. Others say that it would support a better, more just society. And of course, the argument goes on and on. But that's Plato's version of a political philosophy. Well, that's about all we're going to talk about with Plato. I will see you in the next video. Make sure that you get the content of the book read. Make sure that you do all the work that's mentioned in the module, and we'll see you next time. Alrighty.